and we are live with episode 30 of the Wake Up podcast. And on this episode, I have someone special and actually very impromptu in the way we set this up. Godfrey, who is an Austrian-school of economics economist, former fund manager. I don't believe you're managing any funds anymore. And he spent, I think I've got this right, 5 years with the European Parliamentary Committee on Economics or something, which must have been the most painful 5 years of his life. So I'll let Godfrey tell us a little bit about that journey of his, how and why Austrian economics, a little bit about the fund, and maybe a little insight into the Parliamentary Committee of Economics and what that might have been like.
Sure. Well, I went into the city in 1967 and to the City of London as a very young guy and a very new guy in the investment world. And I sort of started pretty much close to the bottom. In those days, you could. You didn't shoot in with the university degree midway up the ranking structure. You worked all your way up, right through the top. And I worked myself to be the CEO of a life insurance company, which was broadly based, of course, on investment and mortality statistics. And so all very boring. I managed fixed interest, which meant I was on the second floor, sneered at by the equity managers, who were all the sort of the glamour boys of the city. But I was there in the city for nearly 40 years. And I did win a few prizes for managing fixed interest funds, which is about currency, of course, and about international balancing of portfolios, so on and so forth. So I'm quite experienced as far as that is concerned. So I've seen the whole gamut come through.
What era was this? Was this sort of 80s, 90s? Which period was this?
No. This was the late 1960s.
Oh, well, okay.
Okay, and we had to wear, this is going to make you laugh, especially as an Aussie, I had to wear a bowler hat in those days as well. We all had bowler hats. And the stock exchange had top hats. They had to have top hats. And I went from there until I left the City of London formally in 2004, where they'd introduced things like computers and stuff, none of which, of course, I understand. So I saw it. That's the sort of the range that I had. So lots of experience. And then it was about Brexit. I went into politics very late in life because I wanted to leave the European Union. I wanted a return for United Kingdom back to self-government. I didn't want to be a province of the European Union. Which is a highly centralized state bureaucracy and nothing to do with free trade at all. And it's about protection. All the things I hated as an economist and indeed a free-born Englishman. So I went into politics. I was elected for Yorkshire for 10 years, although 5 of those years were spent on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. And these are the people for ratifying regulation and then until quite recently of the City of London. This is an extraordinary thing. The committee of 40 people consisted of socialists, trade unionists, elderly Danish housewives, grandmas from France, who most of the time I had to explain what an investment trust was or what a hedge fund was. Or what goes. They didn't even understand it, but they are the people who are regulating. But of course, the strings are pulled by the Commission. The Parliament is simply a veneer of respectability. It's an amending chamber. But the really bad guys are behind the scenes working for the ECB, as all central bankers are. It's an international criminal conspiracy. And the ECB, the Fed, the Bank of England, the bank, they're all the same. They're all criminals, and I got some popularity in my speeches. I got over 50 million views of my parliamentary speeches in total, 50 million, trying to persuade the European population to take out and hang their bankers. Still, sadly, not a single banker has been hanged, but I'm working on it.
Mate, if until we remove their ability to fund their way out of hanging, unfortunately, try as we may, no one's getting hanged on that side of the fence. Wow. So okay. So 5 years there. So when did you wrap up with that committee? When did you sort of say enough was enough?
I finished when we won basically when we won the referendum to leave the European Union. My job was done.
Okay.
I'm not interested in party politics, because they're all crooks as well. So
Yep.
I didn't really want any of that. It was one thing I wanted, and that was Brexit. We've got Brexit of a sort. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
We've got that. And then it was time for me to go back to my little small holding in Yorkshire, with a few sheep and a few chickens and a few horses and a few dogs. And I was hoping to drink the rest of my life away at a British pub, but they've closed all our pubs.
So now, yeah. So now you've stuck in a red room drinking by yourself. So that I think leads us nicely into, I guess, that what we wanted to discuss here is the modern state, and how I did a tweet a little while ago, and what I said was, people keep talking about this as, oh, we just have to get through this, and at some point it's going to get better, with this sort of blind hope that the bureaucrats who cause the mess are somehow going to be the bureaucrats who fix the mess. This is I always say that these clowns couldn't find, and I apologize for the profanity here, but an Australian colloquialism is they couldn't find a root in a brothel. So I don't think these guys could find a solution if it slapped them in the face, because they seem to incessantly feel the need to stick their fingers where they don't belong, because they need to somehow validate their existence. When in reality, the solution is to get the hell out of the way and allow people to make decisions for themselves. So unfortunately, we're living in some sort of Huxleyan, Orwellian, utopian / dystopian version of the future, which is kind of almost a blend of, I call it Brave New 1984. It's like a blend of both, where we're basically at home, told that the world is dangerous and that we shouldn't go out unless we now wear, I think it's 6 masks at the moment. And I mean, each mask apparently will help until you suffocate yourself completely, and then you'll be safe. So tell me your thoughts on how did we get here? Why is it that these bureaucrats are so adept at making things worse than what they can be, should we allow human beings to just make decisions for themselves?
Well, of course, if you go back to Lord Salisbury, the Conservative administration of the late 1890s, his mantra, if you will, was the role of government is simply the role of parliamentarians to facilitate the entrepreneurial spirit of the British people. That was his view. And that's pretty well when we had the fastest growth, the Industrial Revolution, and for better or worse, in my view, of course, better, I would say that, wouldn't I? We had the biggest empire that the world's ever seen. And in my view, that was no bad thing. But it was largely because people were left to get on with it, get on with their personal lives. There was no question of interfering in people's personal lives. So we've gone from that conservative administration to now to the United Kingdom, where I'm speaking to you under martial law. I can't leave my house. If there's a policeman, I have to explain where I'm going and what I'm doing. So we've gone from there, and people, as you rightly say, they have to wear these muzzles, which of course the World Health Organization, everybody knows, every doctor knows, every surgeon knows, are no good at all for keeping out a virus. You might as well put chicken wire over your face to keep yourself getting bitten by mosquitoes. Everybody knows it's ridiculous. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with preserving public health. It's to let the government know that you are subservient. Now, of course, the problem that we have is most of the electorate are gullible. They're stupid and they're gullible. So in the land of the blind, these bureaucrats and politicians manipulate them terribly simply. We didn't even have this. They've closed all the pubs, they've closed the shops. We didn't even have this in the war. And when we had bombs dropping and V2s and V1s and V2s, my father was a fighter pilot in the war. If he was on leave having a drink with a pint with my grandfather, they would go into a pub and try and avoid pubs with too much glass partitions for the blast and stuff like that. But that decision they made. And if there was an air raid siren in a theatre and people were in the theatre or a cinema, somebody would come and say, there's an air raid warning, the show will go on, you can leave if you want to or stay if you want to. And people made their own risk assessment. Now, what you're not allowed to do now is to make a risk assessment for yourself. Now, we both know, and I suspect everybody watching this clip, because they're the sort of people, you will have free-thinking people watching your show. That's why they're watching a show. We all know that if you're fit and healthy and under 70, your survival rate from corona virus is 99%. So what else do we know? We know there's no danger. We know there's no serious danger. We also know that in the flu epidemic, and I can only speak for British figures, in 1957, 1958, 1968, and 2010, the figures were either worse or the same as they are today in mortality statistics. And as an ex-CEO of a life insurance company, I know something about mortality statistics. So what else do we know? Well, we know, therefore, it's bollocks. We know that this is a scam. So what we have to do is then work out, why is there a scam? What's the point in the scam? Why is this being throughout the Western world? Why are they all saying the same thing? The phrase is build back better, reset, the new normal. They're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and they're all burying the freedom of the individual, which of course we thought in England and Australia and the Anglosphere, for want of a better expression, we thought we'd won that freedom years ago. We thought that fight was over. And of course, I think it might have been Reagan who said, you can't just win freedom and hope it's going to stay there for years and years and years. You have to continue fighting for freedom. And that's what we have to do. And that's what we're not doing. A little bit in Eastern Europe now, where they've been relatively recently, historically, out of the Soviet Union. They know and recognize totalitarianism and the lack of freedom when they see it. The Brits don't understand it, and Aussies don't understand it, because we haven't been invaded since 1066. So we're all asleep. We're fast asleep. We don't know what's happening. And of course, it's going on forever. It was going to be for a month. It was going to be for 2 weeks, then it's a month. We're now a year into martial law. The MSM has been bought, mainstream media has been bought off, social media is now being censored. So people aren't getting the truth. All they're doing is believing what they read, what they see on the BBC. Until we can get information to people, to make their own risk assessments and understand what's going on, it's very difficult to see how we get out of this trap. And of course, the people, Bitcoiners and gold bugs, okay, you know, I think we're flip side of the same coin, to be honest. I don't see there's any dichotomy here. We already know this. That's why we're in Bitcoin or gold. We're already there. But we are a tiny percentage of the population who still have not yet woken up. And I think that's our danger.
So a million threads there that I want to pull on, but one in particular was, I was on a podcast with some people, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and we discussed, you know, what was the root cause of like how we went wrong. And I think you touched on a few things there. Is, you know, one element of it is, you know, countries that were traditionally, I mean, Australia has been called the lucky country from the beginning. And I think it was Australia in particular, you know, has some, you know, interesting advantages. One being an island out in the middle of nowhere, which is far away from everything. Number two, being originally, you know, colonized with the values of, you know, the United Kingdom in its heyday, and sort of being built up from there. Number three, being extremely resource rich. So it actually had capital to turn into further capital. So Australia's been very, very, very lucky. And it's really interesting because I was talking to someone, I think it was a couple of years ago actually, where I said Australia is probably one of the most prone countries to fall down, or fall down the rabbit hole of draconianism, because they haven't felt the the terror, call it, or the oppression that comes from programs that are collectivist in nature. Because when all of a sudden, number one, your personal agency and personal responsibility is removed, and it sort of gets pushed onto some faceless, nameless, disembodied organization called the government. But at the same time, you're told that we're all in this together, and that someone else's safety and livelihood is your responsibility. It's sort of, we do away with private property under this guise of it's kind of like you said, this build back better, we're all in this together, new normal. And it's kind of, we remove any autonomy and individual decision making. And most importantly, I think the point that I wanted to make initially is we actually erode responsibility. And I think, and this was sort of the conclusion we came to on that other podcast, is that the problems we're seeing today are a result of the continual erosion or the continual renunciation of individual responsibility. As we do that, as we remove the individual from the locus of responsibility and place it onto some nameless, faceless state or someone else, we start to become dependent. And dependency implies that you are in some form of prison, effectively. You are not free. Like, you've got freedom on one side, you've got dependency on the other. And that's where, under the guise of safety, under the guise of, we'll do it for you, we've slowly slipped into a world that is completely one of dependence, as opposed to personal responsibility, which is the basis, I believe, of freedom. And that for me is extremely dangerous, because it's such a nice sounding thing. Oh, we're all in this together. Oh, let's be equal, let's be nice to each other. But in reality, we actually erode the very I guess the very substance, or the very foundation upon which a free society can be built. So I don't know if you agree with that, the notion of responsibility being at the locus of it, and if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yes, well, of course, you're completely right. In 1945, in Great Britain, we returned to socialist government. And believe me, it wasn't New Labour, it wasn't Blairite, it was rabid socialist. We had tax rates of 95p in the pound. We had estate duties where all our big country houses were torn down. This was socialism, real hardcore socialism. And that was the birth of things like the national health system, which, of course, in the United Kingdom is holy. If you think the cow is sacred in India, you want to talk about the NHS in Britain. It is. You simply cannot criticize it. You just can't. You'll be murdered. So we had this problem in 1945, and there was this pact with the state, which was maybe just a bit going that way anyway. You might argue it started in 1911 with Lloyd George and his acceptance of the Prussian way. Take away people's liberties, but give them a little, bread and circuses, as it might be, to keep going. But in 1945, what the government said, look, we will take care of your health, your education, your social security, your pensions. We will do everything for you. You don't have to worry. The state will do everything for you. And it was a war-torn country, a war-weary country, and people thought that sounds pretty good to me. And you can understand that. You could understand that, where they were coming from, because they're ordinary working guys who'd been in uniform for 5 years, or in the munitions factories, or down the mine or something. And they bought into that. But of course, you're quite right. That took away any sense of responsibility. And the sense of responsibility, poor though people were in the 19th century, they produced things like friendly societies, mutual societies, trade unions, if you will, this kind of thing, to look after themselves, to protect themselves, to make their own lives. They took responsibility of their own size, starting, one might argue, in the days of the Reform Act of 1832 and coming on from 1832. So what you're actually dealing with here is people's self-reliance, which was growing through the Industrial Revolution, and Methodism encouraged that with temperance and so on and so forth. Not that I'm advocating temperance, dear boy, me of all people. But this is the way it was going. And people were getting wealthier, the world was getting wealthier, there was still poverty in the country, so on and so forth. But we now have a generation, 2 generations, who would perhaps accept that welfareism is a lifestyle choice, which is the reason we have so many Estonians, East Europeans, and Poles in the United Kingdom that came over to work here in the European Union days. You know, we've only just come out. They all come to work. They come to work, and if they're sometimes hard work, outdoor work, and what's actually happened is the youngsters, perfectly fit, healthy youngsters in Britain, say, I'm not working for £5 an hour or £10 an hour. It's not worth it. It's freezing. I'll get very close to that if I stay at home and watch daytime TV. You couldn't do a worse thing to a young man than give him money to watch daytime TV. You have taken his soul away. You've debased him morally. And that's what we've done with a whole generation. Not everybody, of course, but enough that we needed to bring in outside people who are very good and done a very good job. I married into a Polish family. They came after the war. They were with 1st Polish Armored Division, so on and so forth. So I'm not anti-immigration. I want people to come in if they're prepared to work, but not come in for welfare. So we've seen this great welfare thing. And the other major assault that we saw, Alex, the major assault we saw in the 70s, mainly in the 70s and the early 80s, was a destruction of the concept of the family as being the natural economic and social unit, which of course we know it is. It's family. Family is the most point. It's never been invented better. You know, for thousands and thousands of years, it's been the family, then the tribe, if you will. And that works. That works because everybody then is in it together. They are in it together when it's family. Now, as you start
at small scale.
Exactly, it's small scale. Now you fill in lots of forms. There's bureaucrats, and this business about we're all in together. Well, you see, we're not. If you're in the public sector, you have index-linked pensions, which have been gone for years in the private sector in Britain. They're unaffordable. They are unsackable. It doesn't matter if you're either in the wealth-creating sector or you're not. And even at the Adam Smith Institute, I've debated at universities, the Adam Smith Institute of all people, representatives, don't understand what a wealth creator is. Your wealth creator can be a hairdresser, a self-employed hairdresser on her own. She is a wealth creator. But you can have your chief executive at the town hall, who's usually a failed solicitor, on £200,000 a year. He's extracting money from the wealth creating system. So we now have this extraordinary situation. We almost have as many people taking money out of the system as are putting in. And it's the little people putting in. And what have they closed down? What is this hurting? Self-employed, small businesses, medium-sized businesses. They're the ones being crushed by this martial law. Every single public sector servant, civil servant, has been paid the full whack for sitting at home since the beginning. How can we come out of this when the people who are enforcing martial law are still getting their full salary check and pension contributions every month? This has got to stop, or we're going to be in lockdown forever. But sooner or later, the tap will be turned off because there'll be no tax revenue. There'll be no money coming in. And nobody in the public sector understands that. They actually do genuinely believe, as do most people in this country, that the government can give money out every single day, regardless, and the money will never run out. Oh, it's the government. How can the government run out of money? Well, of course, they print it. Printing it degrades it. So bring us back to gold, for example. A basket of fiat currencies has fallen since the beginning of this century, only 20 years, by 80% against gold. So we've seen the degradation of fiat currencies. People are seeing it. People are either buying gold or they're buying Bitcoin for the same reasons. And that's why I believe we're on the same path, anything but to get out of this terrible problem of state-controlled paper money.
Absolutely. So there's a quick thread I want to pull on there. So you've got these idiots who don't understand that they're killing the very goose that lays their egg. So it's people like you, me, the hairdresser, and all this sort of stuff that actually do the work, that actually provide, that have our half of our earnings stolen from us through an involuntary tax. But let's just say we still provide for these bureaucrats who then turn around and put us into martial law. So, you know, someone you just mentioned, they believe that the government doesn't run out of money because, printing is one thing. The other option, though, is that the government can bring forward money from the future, in other words, debt. And, we've seen how much debt has piled up, particularly in the last 10, 20 years. Like, it's at a point where it's exponential. So that is effectively, I guess, selling out the future for our children and our children's children, etc. So what do you say to somebody like that psychopath Stephanie Kelton, who wrote that modern monetary theory, where she makes the statement that the amount of debt on the balance sheet doesn't matter because we can just keep going into debt and who cares? What do you say to someone as deranged as that?
Well, we do have this problem because actually the flash to bang time is quite long. So we've heard the buzzwords modern monetary theory, for example, which we know to be just Keynesian economics. We've seen all that before, with the slight difference that Keynesian economics was based on actually only going down the money printing route or the borrowing route at the bottom of the graph, as you will, rather than at the top. I don't agree with it. It's nonsense. It's always been nonsense. But that's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work, going back, very nearly 100 years, that theory. So modern monetary theory is not modern. It's very old-fashioned, that you can somehow print and borrow and print and borrow. There is this hypothesis from these people, it's not a hypothesis for them. They believe it to be an economic law, that you can go on doing this ad infinitum, and that somehow you and your family or your business mustn't get into debt, mustn't spend more money than it earns, otherwise you'll be in trouble. But for some reason that doesn't apply to the state, which is ludicrous. Why would it be different for me and my family, or you and your business? We can't get into debt. We haven't got a little money printing machine, but the state has, and somehow it's different. And if you take it what would be one regarded as ad absurdum, if it works, why don't they give us all a money-making machine, a little machine about yay big for our upstairs bedroom, and when we run out of money, we just go upstairs and print some more. But laughing aside, it makes more sense than giving it to the banks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
At least that would put money into the local community. They give it to the banks, who then give it to people who've already got too much money anyway. So the asset rich for years and years and years. So the assets get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we now have a situation where my nephew in London, who's 30, he's an underwriter at Lloyd's of London. So he's a professional man, well-educated man, hard-working man. The chance of him being able to buy a flat or anything like a zero. I bought my first flat in 1971 in London, near the station. It wasn't fashionable, but it wasn't a rundown bit of London. I could get my train to the city every morning. I bought it for £6,500 on a mortgage. Wow. And I put £500 into the kitty for it. And that's...
So what's it worth now? 6.5 million?
Before they degraded money. That's just before they degraded money. So this modern monetary theory, it gives you the as you will, of course, you'll be totally familiar, but maybe there might be a few people watching this clip who are not, the Cantillon effect. And it always means
Yes.
that you are the first receiver of money, you do okay. It's the guy at the end of the queue when money is being degraded that's the problem. So if you were like me, already had a flat in London, the fact that it's gone up by 15 times or 20 times or 30 times, I'm okay, thank you very much. But my nephew can't buy a flat because that's happened to him. So who's at the front of the queue? The same old people who are always at the front of the queue. Who are at the back of the queue? The same old people who are always at the back of the queue. I don't know about Australia, but I suspect it's the same. The white working class in Great Britain are completely and totally unrepresented. They're totally politically, totally unrepresented. Nobody's looking out for them at all. The collapse of the trade unions, which I have no brief for trade unionism particularly anyway, but leaving that aside, nobody speaks for them. So and now it's crept into the artisan class. So your butch, your chippy, your sparky, your bricky, all these people are politically unrepresented. The only people represented really are your professional middle class and those people in the public sector. Now, I have to say, as a research economist of some years, if we were shipwrecked on a desert island, I'd be the first bloke to be thrown out because I can't do anything. I can't even put a shelf up. I'm utterly useless. All the useful people in the society, people that can come and fix your boiler, are unrepresented in society. See, this is where we were talking earlier before we came on air about an upside down world. Really useful people aren't treated as useful by the state. If you're a diversity officer at Manchester Infirmary, you're earning 3 times as much as a theatre nurse. So you've got a fully trained theatre nurse. My wife's an ex-medic, by the way. So you've got a highly trained medic here. She's a chartered physiotherapist with many years' experience. She's getting paid probably, she's retired now from the NHS, she's probably getting paid half a diversity officer who's on, whatever he's on. He's probably on £70,000 a year, and he's probably got a small team, and he's got an index-linked pension. Who needs him? Who needs him? Nobody needs him.
Nobody.
You could shoot him in the morning and nobody would know.
You
shoot the guy who mends the boiler and you're in the poo.
Yep. Mate, you just nailed that. And I think for me, that really brings home this idea because many days I'll sit around for a minute and I'll be like, is the world crazy or am I actually crazy? Like I'm starting to, almost like question. It's almost like, we're living in one big Ash experiment. If you're familiar with the Ash experiment, where they, draw the different lines and everyone else around you says the wrong line is the long one. And it's like, wait a minute, but, talking to you here just sort of helps me realize that maybe it's not me. that, that there is something fundamentally wrong here. But I think this derangement syndrome of living almost like we're living a fantasy, basically. Like you said, things are upside down. The things we need are apparently not important, but the things we don't need are now relegated to elevated to importance. And for me, the way I kind of look at it, I was on a discussion a couple of weeks ago on this Clubhouse app, and I kind of explained how capital and capitalism is capital is real, and it's it's natural resources and it's human resources, our time and energy, and we sort of blend those two and we create wealth, we create capital, and capitalism is the process of doing so. Now what we have in the world today is some sort of, I wouldn't even know what to describe it as. It's some sort of Frankenstein blend of Keynesianism, socialism, cronyism, fantasyism, or whatever. But that operates by just arbitrary made up rules, which are created. New rules are created every day, which are contradictory and divergent and all sorts of things. But it's almost this world that doesn't really exist, but we live in it through some sort of shared fictional belief. But for me, the way I explained it is, it's like someone who doesn't believe in gravity decides to run and jump off a cliff. And for the first 3 or 4 seconds while he's rising in the air, he thought he beat gravity. But if you zoom out a little bit, longer than the 4 or 5 seconds, because fundamentally this century has been about a couple seconds on the, from an evolutionary timescale, is that we think we're doing something here, but gravity will catch up. Like reality does catch up. As we play this fantasy and actually erode the real capital base that we've built society on, as we destroy the people who are useful, the boilers, the chippies, the electricians, the actual people who do the work, as we bury them, and as more of them just sort of give up and say, well, what the fuck's the point of working when this idiot here is earning 3 times more than me, doing something completely useless, and the idiot on the other side is doing nothing, earning the same amount. So fuck it, I'll just do nothing. So as we do that, I think reality is going to come and catch up with us much quicker than what we're anticipating. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are going to get, massively hurt along the way. And that's going to be, the idiots will get hurt, but unfortunately, a lot of good people will get hurt, which I think is sad. I don't know if you've got any comments on that, but I think that segues us really nicely into the gold and silver discussion.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. What you describe is the cartoon character, don't you? That's screeching off the cliff edge, and it goes further for the effect to get the laugh of the cartoon. They go much further out before they fall, and then they look down, and then surprised they're going to fall down the canyon. You're absolutely right. Now, I don't do so much lecturing as I used to at universities, economics faculties at Durham University, Cambridge University, so on and so forth. I used to do quite a lot of that as a guest lecturer. But what is interesting is what we do actually have. And your average person thinks, certainly your political activist assumes that we live in a capitalist society, which of course we don't. We don't have anything close to capitalism. What we have, which would have been in my day when I did my professional exams, would have been called mercantilism. And I'm going back to the 1960s. It would have been called mercantilism. It's not free capitalism at all. Today we call it crony capitalism, sometimes it's referred to, but that is mercantilism. Now here's something that normally gets the undergraduates wound up like a clockwork duck, and that is I try and explain to them what actually system that we have, or certainly when we were in the European Union, the system we had. Now the system of the European Union is actually fascist. It's fascism. Now, we get so used to hearing this as a pejorative term. It's things that the National Union of Students chant and they shout because they haven't had the benefit of a traditional education. If youngsters understood and were properly educated, they would understand that fascism is a political system. And it used to be quite a respectable political system in Italy in the 1920s, so on and so forth, before it sort of went wrong and was abused, as all these systems always are, end up being abused. Of course they do. But basically, fascism is a combination of the bureaucracy, the state, the banks, the politicians, all together to subvert the independence of the individual. And I've never heard anybody contradict that. Anybody who's made an effort to actually find out what fashion really is. You've got to look at that's what it is. And if you think about the European Union, that is what it is. It's a cartel of big business, which is represented by lobbyists, an unelected commission who make the law, not the parliament, that's the amending chamber, and co-located, if you will, intellectually with the banks. So the European Central Bank, for example, is part and parcel of rescuing any bank that goes wrong. So if the bank goes wrong, they underwrite it with taxpayers' money. So people say, "Oh, the central bank is the bank of last resort." It is the taxpayer who is the bank.
We are,
and still we don't hang any. So this is the problem that we have. It's the problem of people simply not understanding, and the nearest, this always gets me sometimes into a little bit of trouble, and you're in Brazil, but this is a little bit like the Renaissance Catholic Church. and their grip on the people with fear of hell and damnation and purgatory. The government is there to make your life easier, to protect you. The world's going to boil. You know, in the old days, it was the individual would boil in hell. Now we're all going to boil if we don't buy in to fake global warming. And it's been 20 years. Now we know it's fake. Behind these red curtains, it's snow outside. You know, it's freezing. It's freezing. We've had this for 20 years, but the world's going to boil. Well, when's it going to boil? You know, it doesn't. It's just not happening. We've got climate change by and by, bits and pieces, bit up, bit down. We have done as long as mankind was on the planet. But the fact that we're all going to die if we don't move all our cars to lithium batteries and all. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't invent any of this, could you? You couldn't invent it. The sheer crass stupidity of everything doing net zero in this country. Everything's got to be electric by 2030. Boris Johnson. We're going to have all electric cars.
Jesus
Nobody
Christ.
actually understands that if you plug your electric car in, somebody has to manufacture electricity from somewhere.
Electricity.
But they think it's magic. It's magic.
Yeah.
And we live in fairyland with politicians, fairyland with bureaucrats, and most of the punters walking around the town with their dog muzzles on are living in fairyland as well. They're just miserable now.
Okay. Before I want to ask one last question before we get into the golden Bitcoin topic, which is, you mentioned in 1945, heavy socialist government comes into the UK, up to 95 pence on the pound, taxes. So two parts to this question is, was there a revolt that pushed socialism back down again, or did it somehow morph into something worse over the last 70 years? Because what I'm curious about is there a pattern re-emerging that represents that time period at the moment, or is history repeating itself? Is it rhyming, or is it just some completely different song at the moment? Is it dumber than back then?
I think what the problem is, when you have a really rabid socialist government, which we had from 1945 to about 1953, I seem to remember, although I was watching the coronation on a little tiny TV when the Queen was the Queen's coronation. I still remember it. It's my first memory. But that was then when Winston Churchill came in. But when you have a socialist government, extreme socialist government, and it was, and people still in this country don't necessarily recognize that. They don't know how extreme it was. What do is you move your conservative government to the left. Every time you have a left-wing government, it moves the incoming government to the left, because they don't unpick it. They don't try and change it. They don't try and deregulate it. They don't try and change anything. So it moves it to the left. Now, when we had Maggie Thatcher, for a small time, she stemmed it. She didn't move it much back, but she did stem it, and she did some good things. She got rid of the nationalized industries, which were absurd. But of course, nationalized industries were then replaced by the state, which regulates the industry. Fascism is all about fascism, which is the state regulates the industry, unlike communism, which owns the industry. And they're the two differences, but it's the flip side of the same coin. Now, what we have here is when you have welfarism, when you have left-wing statist governments, which socialism is, you actually end up with this rather weird thing that everything becomes statist. So when we had the advent of Tony Blair, who came in, the Brave New World, and everybody waved their Union Jacks, which always is makes me suspect you've got a scoundrel there when he's handing out Union Jacks. I think there's one place you don't like, mate, and that's our country. So all that carried on, but it's statist. So now, and of course, we've moved now far for this government we have under Boris Johnson is much, much further to the left than Tony Blair's Labour administration of 1997. Much further to the left. The Labour Party could never have got away with martial law. And empowering the police to stop citizens on the street. Do you know we had somebody the other day was fined in his family having fish and chips from a takeaway? Takeaway is perfectly legal. You can go to a takeaway meal and have your fish and chips. He was having it in the car so it didn't get cold, and he was fined for not driving home and eating it at home. This is the kind of world, and I've seen the Melbourne police in action too. Pretty disgusting. Moving people around because they're too on the beach, too far away from their flat. And
Yeah.
but how do we push back against this when we have a generation now who think that's normal? They think it's
It's
normal.
I think what you described there, I think the technical term is sort of the Overton window, right? It's
Yes,
this, it's
yes,
the
lovely.
acceptable
Yeah.
Window of discourse. For those who don't know what that means who are listening to this, do a quick Wikipedia search. But in essence, it means that, you know, the Overton window is the acceptable frame or, you know, window of discussion. And as it gets shoved to one side, you know, the acceptable range of discussion is in there. And the only way to move the Overton window is to, you know, to radically shift the conversation away from it. But unfortunately, like you said, is most people, instead of doing that, instead of having the courage to do that, they just, you know, step into their little spot and, you know, yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, and agree with the common discourse. So coming then to gold, Bitcoin, sound money as a mechanism to I guess abolish the Overton window altogether, is, you know, I think we obviously agree on all of this stuff, and we'll talk in a minute about sort of the potential divergences of Bitcoin and gold, despite being the same part of the, you know, the two sides of the same coin. But I think first and foremost, you know, what gold and Bitcoin represent is sound money, and what sound money stands against is this idea of fiat money, and fiat money being a form of money that is issued by the decree of some sort of institution, and that institution gives itself the monopoly on the production of money. And therein, like I always argue when I'm talking to people about why Bitcoin is important, is I believe the monopoly on money is what gives the state, the government, the ability to actually operate a bankrupt business model, and create not a customer service provider relationship, but a overlord subject relationship, which is what we live in today. So by, you know, moving to gold, by opting out of the fiat money, which effectively feeds the beast, by us opting into their system, we're actually feeding the jailer that jails us. And we're wondering why, you know, we can't get out of jail. It's because we're giving them the money to jail us. So we're giving them the capacity to do so. So can you talk a little bit about how gold traditionally represented a non-fiat money, and as a, you know, as the actual rightful, I guess, natural, organic, emergent money? Can we talk a little bit about that? And then let's talk about how Bitcoin represents a reinvention of that.
Sure. Gold, well, of course, I'm a well-known gold bug for all the reasons that people are Bitcoin bugs. For the same reason, I want to get out of the state-controlled money system. And of course, what you've been talking about there, you're quite right. And of course, it's not even new, is it? 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, Rothschild said the same thing. He said, it doesn't matter who you vote for. It's a question of who controls the money. That's the key. Who controls the money? So then you ask yourself, the natural question is, for example, who is the most influential person in the world, or more influential than Boris Johnson? Well, it's Bill Gates. It is not another politician. It's people like Bill Gates or George Soros, who have wealth beyond human imagination. So they actually are the movers and shakers today, non-political, and they can do what they like. So, for example, they've bought mainstream media here. They've bought Sky TV. Not in Australia, but they bought the left have bought Sky TV in the United Kingdom. Channel 4 is on the left. Newspapers have been bought on the left. We actually have Daily Telegraph journalists suggesting that Bill Gates should be given a Nobel Prize. Now, don't tell me that money hasn't changed hands for that, because every man has his price. Some people's prices, of course, are extremely low. You can buy some people, you know, for a drink. I am one of them. But this is one of the problems that we have, is trying to get out of this bubble. But it's the same with the BBC. People don't believe the BBC. They've disengaged with the BBC, but they send their check for £150 every year. And you ask them why, they say, well, it's a criminal offence if I don't. And I try and explain, if none of us did it, the BBC would collapse, which is what they want. But people, especially in Britain, people aren't used to disobeying the law. You know, we're a law-abiding nation, generally speaking, and that's one of the problems. So anyway, gold. Now, here's the good news with gold. The thing I like about gold, and my gold is in coin of the realm. Mine is in sovereigns and Britannias. It's coin of the realm, which I like. It doesn't carry any VAT, and it doesn't carry capital gains tax. And the other thing is I can do with a whole pocket load of them, for example, I can go, well, let's take a sovereign, which is 100 years old. That sovereign in 1905, for example, pulling a figure out of the air, 1905, that would buy you bed breakfast in a decent hotel in London in 1905. A gold sovereign today will do the same thing. It hasn't degraded. And in 200 years' time, that gold sovereign will still buy you bed breakfast. But moreover, the important thing about gold, if I had that sovereign in my hand, it would buy me bed and breakfast in any capital city in the world. In the world, I can go anywhere with that and exchange that gold coin. So that's what I like about it. Now, here's the downside about gold, because I'm not starry-eyed about gold. You know, I'm an old geezer. I've been around the block. I can tell you that I'm not starry-eyed. I know that one of the problems we have is that the price is manipulated down. So my gold coins are in a vault in London, not a bank vault, a private vault. I wouldn't trust a bank with anything at all. It's in a private vault. You would think the price of gold, therefore, is moved on whether me or people like me bought or sold gold, my gold coins. You would imagine traditional economics, buy and sell disciplines would, but it doesn't happen. Now we know that doesn't happen, and we ask why that doesn't happen. Is because central banks don't like gold. Every time you buy a piece of gold, of course, you kick a central banker in the balls. So they don't like you owning gold because it takes away their control. So there they have, they don't want us to hold gold. So what they do is they facilitate through the SEC in New York, Wall Street, and London's the same. You can sell naked short, you can short gold. So whereas gold today should be at least $3,000 an ounce, and it would be if it wasn't manipulated by the JP Morgans of this world perfectly legitimately. Sometimes they get caught bending a few rules, they get fined, but they make it up in a few weeks. So this is what they're allowed to do. With it's totally state complicit and regulatory state complicit. And we also know that there are probably 800 pieces of paper representing one piece of gold. So although I'm not trading, and most people aren't trading their gold, most people are not selling their gold. You'd have to be mad to sell your gold at the moment, or at all. Maybe. So it's not based on that. It's based on manipulation by the gangsters on Wall Street and the gangsters, in central banking and banking all over the world. So that's one of the downsides with it, and that is a problem with gold. And it's not an easy ride with gold. It's not an easy ride, and I'll come on in a minute. I'll come on to some other things where there is a problem with gold. But I believe it to be the same problem with Bitcoin, which not everybody accepts until I've explained it. Then they scratch their head. They may still not agree with me, but at least they're scratching their head, and that's a start.
Okay, interesting. So there's a couple of things. I mean, I might tack on to that. So when I was a bit younger, in my, what was I? This is 2011 now. So 10 years ago. So I was in my early 20s. That was when I traded my way through the whole 2007, 2008 crash as a young, dumb 19, 20-year-old kid who thought he was brilliant, made a bunch of money on options trading in the beginning and then lost everything, and managed to dig myself almost $250,000 into debt. And after that, I had no choice but to go and knock on doors selling pay television to dig my way out of the hole that I was in. And every night I would read about what the hell did I do wrong? How do markets function? What is economics? What the hell is this QE thing that these people are starting to do? And I started to come around to the, still remember the days of Mark Faber and Gerald Celente and, you know, all of those guys who were spruiking gold, Doug Casey and Peter Schiff back in the day. And I started to understand, you know, the raison d'etre, I guess, for gold and silver. And I did personally quite well for myself during the 2011, 2012 bull run in gold and silver. I remember picking up silver at $70 and selling it right at the peak at $50, and both physical and paper silver. And I remember actually back then initially dismissing Bitcoin. So, you know, I just thought, I'll stick with my real solid money here. You know, the idiots can stick with their digital funny money, you know, to my everlasting, I guess, regret. But in any case, we live and learn. So I'm by no means against the raison d'etre for something like gold. But for me, what I recognize as its fundamental weakness is something that I think some gold bugs recognize as its strength, which is its physicality. And for me, I actually think that the nature of its physicality makes it easy to confiscate, control, and manipulate, which I think is gold's biggest weakness. Is it is the thing that is most easy to co-opt, because it's extremely hard. If you want to build a capital base in gold, where the hell are you going to put it other than someone else's vault? I mean, unless you're going to dig up a hole in your backyard and hope to God that nobody ever finds it, you know, and being able to move it around is quite, you know, dangerous, I guess, because it is a bearer asset. So that physicality, its physical nature, I think, is a fundamental weakness, particularly moving into a digital world. Because one example I always use for someone is, you know, if you want to send somebody uncensorable money around the world, you're not going to, you know, put some gold flakes into an envelope and send it around the world. You know, that's actually not very useful in a world that's becoming more hyper connected and digitized. Even though I believe that we need to localize and fragment the local, I guess, the decentralized local nature of where the world is heading, whether we want to or not. You know, this whole globalism is going to either break or we're going to reverse it. But in that kind of world, we need a mechanism for somebody in Australia to trade with somebody in Zimbabwe, to trade with somebody in China, to trade with somebody in America, to trade with someone in the UK. Gold just won't cut it, because if we can't send the physical stuff around. So all we're going to do is rely on some sort of central institution to issue us some form of digital token over the gold, which again is subject to concentration, centralization, and then confiscation, manipulation, etc. So I just think gold, whilst it was absolutely necessary in a world that was less connected and less digital, I think its physicality actually is the final nail in the coffin for it. So I don't know if you've got any comments on that at this point, before we go into your point about why you think gold and Bitcoin both have a problem.
Of course, you're completely right on all of that. None of that I can possibly dispute at all. And we know, of course, in 1720, the French government confiscated gold because of its physicality. We also know that Roosevelt, of course, confiscated gold in probably the biggest historical heist in modern history. He stole the American people's gold. But though he's still revered today, funnily enough, but we seem to love gangsters, don't we, and highwaymen for some reason. But you're quite right in all of this. You're quite right in all this. And you have to then work out why you're holding gold. And I've been accumulating gold coinage for probably the last 25 years. I've probably accumulated most of mine at $900 an ounce, perhaps, or some at $250 an ounce. You know, it's been, you know, it's been going like that. And I still accumulate a little bit here and there. But I have a role for those gold coins, because that is, for me personally, it isn't to trade, it isn't to sell. It's then to a much younger wife, for her then to be able to go to that vault by and by, go upstairs to the vault where they actually deal in gold, and then exchange it for whatever the currency is of the day in order to get through to the next month. So I have quite a specific role for my gold. And I wouldn't say that I've made any money out of it, because gold isn't an investment. Gold isn't, a lot of people make that mistake, don't they? They think gold isn't an investment.
It's a savings vehicle.
Wealth. And it has preserved my wealth. And that is all I require it to do. And I suspect at my age, there are millions of people like me at my age whose only goal is to preserve the wealth that they actually have. And such of the coins that are left will go to the next generation. Now, so I'm all right with that. I'm happy with that. And of course, we also know, as we go back originally to gold, I mean, certainly the 17th century, the 18th century, when gold was money, real money, gold was money. And of course, then you had a certificate for the gold, because you didn't want to actually carry it down the track because of highwaymen, because of that. And that's actually brought in your gold asset back, if you will, your gold back pound note, or whatever it is, all these things, all of which I understand and I accept that. Gold at the moment is difficult to deal with, insofar as if you want to settle bills in wherever it happens to be, you're going to have some counterparty risk. So you've got to have, if it's centralized somewhere, let's say not within the state, but within a reputable bullion dealer who can certificate the fact that you've got it, and you can have maybe the real ways of dealing with that kind of exchange. But you're absolutely right, nothing is foolproof. And of course, if they want to confiscate it, although mine is in a deep vault in London, don't come and rob me, folks, it's not here. Don't come and get me here, it's no good. It's in a deep vault in London. It's not in a bank, which are owned by the state or part owned by the state these days. It's in a private high security vault, okay? And that's fine. Now you would say, well, how can the state steal it from me? How can the state, well, of course, they can't get access to the vault. They can't do that. They don't have a key. They don't have the right thumbprint. They don't have any of that kind of stuff. They don't have it. But of course, we might have not been having this conversation 2 or 3 years ago. But now, as I sit here under martial law, and I know your countryman Julius Assange is being held without the benefit of habeas corpus, I know that the fundamental principle of Australian English, which is English law, and indeed American law, not corpus juris in the European Union, incidentally, is one of the main planks is the presumption of innocence. HMSRC and IRS have waved that away. There is no presumption of innocence by the taxman in America or Great Britain. They can assume they have access to our bank records for the last 6 years at the very least. And if you buy over £10,000 worth of gold, it has to be logged. And they have a way of checking that. That has gone to a central register. So they know I have the gold. So all they need to do is to knock on the door. And this is now, the way we're going now, this could be in a month's time. This could be a month's time. And say, you've got to give up your gold for a fixed price, like Roosevelt said, for $25 an ounce or whatever it is. The state's going to buy it for you from $2,000 an ounce or whatever it is, £1,000 an ounce. We're going to buy it from you at that price, but you know the open price is $1,500 or it's more than that, whatever. So you know that they can do that, and they will knock on the door. You have and there's no court of appeal. There's no serious court of appeal. They can just say, and you won't tell them. I won't tell them where my money is, and I won't give them the key. But without habeas corpus, they could take me away. They could put me in solitary confinement like they did with Julian Assange and leave me there until I hand over the gold. They let me out to open the door. They can do that. They can do that. Now, here's where it gets a bit controversial. This is where it gets a bit controversial. With that power, with no presumption of innocence, with access and martial law and all the other things which could come down the road with the collapse of fiat currency, they could still go back through any Bitcoiners banks or any companies, but they can look, it's all there. And if you can't account for it, they can assume that you're holding cryptocurrency outside the state system, Bitcoin, for example. They can assume that. And they can say, we are making that assumption. You're the finance director or it's an individual. We're going to take you away with no habeas corpus. We're going to lock you up until you tell us where that money went. And if it's Bitcoin, we want access to your wallet. They don't need to get to the wallet, you see. They don't need to do that. these days with complete and total totalitarian power. They only need to get you, which is why my money isn't in Switzerland. Switzerland said, well, why don't you put, I've got friends in Switzerland. I don't have enough, incidentally, to be important enough. I just got a friend in Switzerland who does it. He said, well, you put it in Switzerland, they can't get it. Well, they can get it. They can get it because they've got me. They've got the body. And this is, I can't see any difference between that and Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin is too small at the moment. Bitcoin and gold, to an extent, in private holdings in this country and America, is still relatively small. It's only about, I don't know, 1% of the average portfolio. Gold is quite small. There isn't enough gold held by the private citizens in Britain to really go through that kind of procedure yet. But as I spoke to Stefan yesterday, I see Bitcoin turnover going to 5 trillion, certainly, and probably beyond. And I'm sure you do too. Suddenly, when it gets to that kind of money, they're interested. The state is interested. And they will offer you a deal to go to state crypto. You can buy our state crypto, come into the state crypto system, but we've got to avoid Bitcoin on a big scale because it's now gone to 5 trillion or 10 trillion. And then suddenly it's become interesting to them. And if you don't cooperate, you're banged up in pokey until such time as they release you. There's nothing much you can do about it. And that's where I see the danger of confiscation. I take every point you've made, Alex, about the international trading system. I understand all that. But until that happens, we need some major players coming out. I want to hear Mercedes say, we will accept Bitcoin for our motor cars. I want to hear all these things. I want to hear Siemens saying, we will accept Bitcoin for our chemicals and our electronics. Until that happens, the power of big business behind it, the only thing that can cripple the power of central banks and politicians is big business. That's got to be split. At the moment, they're all in the same camp. We've got to split it. I am very pro Bitcoin. I'm a huge supporter of the concept of Bitcoin. I own Bitcoin. I'm going to buy more Bitcoin. But my point that I'm making is, at the moment, I think there's a degree of naivety with Bitcoin holders that this can't happen, and it can happen. And I think we should be building our defenses now, not waiting till they're on our tail.
100% agree. So it's funny, before you brought this up, I actually had a note here called that just says information is harder to censor. And I guess the best, your final point there about building the defenses now is categorically important. And whether it's Stefan or Matt Odell and a lot of other people who are prominent in the Bitcoin space, we always preach this idea of get your bloody Bitcoin off the exchanges and into some sort of private holdings. Now, that's not a panacea. That doesn't solve everything because, like you said, these institutions and organizations can go back, find out what you bought on the exchanges, see where it was moved. The Bitcoin blockchain is public, so they can view potentially where that is. The beauty, though, is unlike gold, which I can either, if I'm the state agent, I can beat you up and force you to give me the key. And I can actually validate that the gold is there and that somehow, we can get access to it because it's physical. I have real plausible deniability that I may have lost the key that gives access to my Bitcoin. And there's not me nor anybody else who can regenerate that key because it's gone. And furthermore, what I would also argue is most Bitcoiners, and I would think that most Bitcoiners will sit, particularly the more, radical revolutionary nature like myself, would burn our keys before giving them over to the state, as an example. So I think it's a more defensible position. Now, it's not entirely defensible, of course, nothing is. I actually don't, I'm probably one of the more pessimistic Bitcoiners in the space who believe that this next 5 to 10 years, and probably the shorter term will be a lot more messier, is going to be extremely difficult. It's sort of the state is like a rabid dog in the corner, and it's going to swipe and try and scratch, the eyes out of anything that is potentially threatening it. And at the moment, the largest threat on the horizon is Bitcoin. Now, luckily for us, at this point in time, they are incompetent and arrogant enough by and large. There's a few of them who actually understand that Bitcoin is a threat, but by and large, most of them are so arrogant and stupid that they think that it's, the internet funny money still. And like you said, when it hits that sort of 3, 4, 5, 10 trillion, they will start to notice it, and in their desperation, maybe a better analogy is a person drowning and bringing whoever is around them down with them. They will attempt to do that, but I would argue that information has a much, like Bitcoin's innovation in transforming money into a form of information that has all of the attributes of gold but does it better is the checkmate move to the state, because it'll be extraordinarily difficult for them to jail everybody and try and prove that everybody has access to which bit of Bitcoin. It's a much harder thing to do than confiscating physical gold. Now, again, notwithstanding that, I don't put it past them that they will 100% attempt to do that. And this is where, like you said, building our defenses now, having multiple wallets, having distributed, locations around, where your Bitcoin is stored, etc., is fundamentally important at this point in time, because we need to do that. And then secondarily, your thing about businesses accepting it and holding it. I think before even accepting it, what we need to be looking for, and I think this is obviously already happening with people like Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy and other public companies, putting it on their balance sheet. So what I think, I'll rephrase what you said earlier, is we need to see players with balance sheets getting some of their skin in the Bitcoin game. And as that happens, the game theory starts to change, because then you all of a sudden have institutions that, through what I call economic Darwinism, they don't want to hold, US dollars or euros that are just evaporating in value. They're going to want to put some of their cash balance into something that is, is not, apologies for the noise, that is not going to be inflated away. So I think that the path to 5 trillion, and I would argue that this is where the game theoretic defense naturally emerges with Bitcoin. On its path to 5 trillion, those large balance sheets are going to be part of what takes it there and makes the Bitcoin as a target much more difficult, because those companies won't put gold on their balance sheet. Maybe some will, but they will first and foremost put Bitcoin on the balance sheet long before they do gold. And I think that's where we've got a mixture of defense here. We've got one, which is the economic Darwinism that is, inherent in any institution with half a brain that wants to protect their purchasing power and wants to not leave their balance sheet in evaporating fiat money. And number two is our ability to use Bitcoin's nature as information to, make it a difficult target for confiscation. So that would be my response to that. And again, I would say that is much harder to do with gold versus doing it with Bitcoin. So I don't know if you've got any comments on that.
Yes, well, I don't disagree, you see. It's a question of emphasis. So what you have to do is look at your, what is the mission statement of the asset, if you will? And if it's gold, depending on what you want. Now, for me personally, as an investor now, I want maintenance of purchasing power. Gold fills that bill for me. Then, of course, it's a question of diversification. I've made this point on a number of occasions. Being a professional investor, diversification is for me is important. So I want to have precious metals. I want to have Bitcoin. I want to have some real estate, because that's all eggs in one basket is a dangerous game to play. And I think, and I'm very overweight precious metal. and there'll be lots of people very overweight Bitcoin, and I understand that, but it's a slightly dangerous game to play. And when I look, and people have been following me in Bitcoin, I've had a lot of interaction on Twitter because I didn't come into the Bitcoin game until I knew about Bitcoin. I've been following Bitcoin. I hadn't bought Bitcoin until October. So I know about these. I know about this. So I looked at a lot of people. Now there aren't many what I would call professionals in the game. Everybody who's interviewed me is a professional. You know how many bees make five. You've been around. You know the game. But there's a lot of musicians and there's a lot of art people, but nice people, articulate people, clever people. Otherwise they wouldn't be in Bitcoin. They're already clever. Otherwise they wouldn't be in Bitcoin. But I think what they have not actually hauled in, that it isn't the final solution. It's not a one-shot kill. It could get close to that. It could be definitive. I hope it is, because I'm a huge believer in it, which is why I've got some. But of course, it depends what your time horizon is. So, for example, are you prepared to take the slightly roller coaster ride of Bitcoin? Does that matter to you? If you put it aside for maybe 10 years, for example, it doesn't matter to you. It's like equities. But I always used to say when I was investment manager, you've got to give a 7-year window to equities. You know, you've got to be careful with equities. If you want to come back, it's 7 years. Don't keep checking the price, put it in the bottom drawer, walk away, which is what I've done with gold, and it's served me well. The other thing I would say is, and I briefly hinted at it a bit earlier. I'm 71 years old, and if you'd told me even 5 years ago that I could be sitting here locked in my house under martial law, there is nothing now that would surprise me. And we have seen in history, and I'm sure you know your history as I know mine. I'm also a military historian, a social historian. I'm published in these matters as well. They can, if the state with a politicized police force, and we do have, and sadly so do you in Australia, they can take anything somehow from you if they want to, because they've got you, and they can do anything to you or your family or whatever it is to make you brass up whatever numbers you need for whatever asset you've got, whether it's Bitcoin or gold or anything. And we're living in a world now, sadly, where we seem to be going in that direction. Now, what I believe to be the case is, and I think you're right, if there's corporate holdings, but you can see how easy it is for them to have a sunset clause, for example, if it didn't suit the politicians of the sunset bank, saying you must, corporately, you must unload your Bitcoin for the new cryptocurrency that we have in the bank. You've got 5 years to do it. Or there's any number of things they can do in a totalitarian state with a politicized police force. We're nowhere near that at the moment. I know we're not near that at the moment, and we might not even see it in my lifetime. But you will see this in yours. You will see this in yours. And all I'm saying is, you can be really clever technically, as clever as you like, but if they can get to your body, you know, but was a great phrase. I can't remember who was it, who said, if you've got a man by the balls, you'll find his heart and mind quickly follow. And so this is the world we're witching now. So I do believe that what we need, what Bitcoiners need, is not political support, because political support is by nature corrupt. Not banking support, because it's by nature corrupt. What we need is big business, leading figures, maybe slightly maverick. I mean, I don't know. I hold no breach. I don't like him individually. He's rather ghastly little man. Richard Branson, for example. But if he was to pick up the mantle of Bitcoin and say, I will accept Bitcoin for your transatlantic flights or your holidays in the West Indies, Bitcoin is fine, we'll take it, we have a Bitcoin account. We need one of the leading, or lots of, Elon Musk maybe, who's spoken well of Bitcoin. Although I wouldn't buy one of his cars either, but that's leaving that aside. If we had a few of those people who are not just big leading businessmen, rich men, fashionable
Yes.
fashionable leaders of the business
Yep.
community. And that, I think, is our protection rather than an intricate system of wallets or of technical protection. It's a mass movement of Bitcoin. It has to become a mass movement to make it bomb-proof. And if you think about that for a second, gold is mass movement. It's had 5,000 years to do it. I mean, gold is a mass movement in India, the Indian subcontinent. I mean, the whole middle class is based on gold, or ownership of gold in some form. So it's already slightly mass. I agree. I think gold's going to be around for another 5,000 years. I'm not disputing if everything with a following breeze with Bitcoin goes along, people look back and say, see how much more money I've got with Bitcoin than I would have had with gold. But I'm not altogether sure that's the point with some investors.
Yeah, interesting. So I've got two comments for that, and I know we've run over the original 60 minutes, but I've really enjoyed this. So thank you for hanging on, Godfrey. So two things. One is, I mean, we've recently just seen Elon place Bitcoin in his bio, and a series of other so-called fashionable celebrity type business owners. So the founder of Reddit, Naval Ravikant, the founder of Angel List, and all these others. So I think that watershed moment is happening, and I think that's only going to accelerate. I think a big part of that was Michael Saylor via MicroStrategy placing 80-90% of their corporate treasury into Bitcoin last year, and sort of leading the way for that, because now you have this, what I was on a call with a fund manager in Australia 3-4 months ago, and I actually reframed Bitcoin in his mind. I said 5 years ago, as a fund manager, buying Bitcoin was a risk. Today, as a fund manager, not buying Bitcoin is a risk, is a reputational risk, because now you're going to be looked at as like, were you the idiot who was the only one that didn't do it? So I think that game theory is starting to change, both for the fund managers, but also for these fashionable business leaders, call them. And I think Elon is a perfect example. Branson would be another great example. I mean, we've also just seen, again, I really do not like Ray Dalio. I think he's just the perfect product of the traditional financial system. But even he is now apparently warming up to Bitcoin. They're buying 21,000 Bitcoin and adding that to their holdings as part of, I think, their alpha fund or whatever it was. So slowly, I think this is happening. And it's one of those things where, if we look at the mimetic nature of how trends spread, particularly in today's day and age, I mean, we saw this corona hysteria spread across the world in a matter of weeks, thanks to some, stupid government, fear mongering. I think this sort of, desire to like, holy shit, something's wrong here, and Elon's doing it, and Branson's doing it, and this guy's doing it. I think that represents a real opportunity for that Bitcoin acceleration to occur. So that's sort of one point. So I would 100% agree with that as one of the things. But like you said, there's no silver bullet here. I call it the lead bullet strategy. We need to see that happening. We need to see also like smaller jurisdictions. I mean, Eastern Europe is actually, I think, a perfect example of a place that would strongly benefit from adding Bitcoin to their government balance sheets, which, as far as I understand, Bulgaria has done to an extent when they confiscated a bunch of Bitcoin from a prior exchange. But I think that is also going to potentially start to emerge alongside the technical things that we're doing, and the plausible deniability, etc. So I think there is multiple pathways forward here, and I think that's eventuating. But I want to leave you with one thought about gold and gold and the Bitcoin relationship. So I agree with you that gold has existed and persisted as a wealth preservation tool to date for the last 5,000 years, because it has been fundamentally superior to any other object that could represent this metaphysical fabric of society we call money. So gold is the ultimate embodiment of this technology called money, because it's got these unique attributes. It's an inert metal. It is, it is scarce. It is, portable, recognizable, etc. Never has something beaten it in those attributes. So I would leave you with one thing: is gold's maintained its purchasing power, and it's acted as a wealth preservation tool for so long because it hasn't been beaten. But I actually think gold's monetary premium, or gold will lose its monetary premium in the coming century, and therefore lose its ability to preserve wealth, because, again, similar to what happened with silver versus gold, is that silver didn't just lose its monetary premium and sort of move towards its industrial value because of some, magical reason. It's because as paper money emerged, it solved gold's divisibility problem. Traditionally silver existed to, be the, the little brother to gold's, higher wealth. So in the same way as silver's lost its monetary premium, I actually think gold will long-term lose its monetary premium because Bitcoin is so far superior. Again, based on the assumption that that Bitcoin becomes the most defensible non-state alternative for money. And through economic Darwinism, not only individuals, but groups, communities, small states, and businesses will move towards holding Bitcoin as a way to protect the wealth that they've developed. So that's a long way of saying that I don't know if the hypothesis that gold will still have its monetary premium 5,000 years from now is correct. So curious to hear your thoughts on that.
You're quite right to raise that gold-silver ratio. I would have raised it myself if you hadn't done, and I totally accept that point. It depends if you argue that gold, you see, or some people want to do, I think it will buy today what it buy tomorrow. Now, I'm quite happy to accept your hypothesis that in years to come, Bitcoin will buy you a lot more than just par. I don't dispute that. Gold has really produced basically par for all these years, and I think that will maintain. I think it's quite possible that Bitcoin in years to come will buy you a lot more. The premium over money, or what is ever money of the day, will be significantly more. I don't think I'd dispute that. It's a question of what you want to do, what your risk profile is, what your outlook is, what your time horizon is. All these things come together, and I believe that in diversification, so somebody with my time horizon would have probably a smaller percentage of Bitcoin in their portfolio. A man of your age, I would expect to have a much higher proportion of Bitcoin in his portfolio. But I'm a boring professional. But let me give you an analogy, if I may. My father was a Spitfire pilot, all right? And in the Battle of Britain, he just missed the Battle of Britain by a few months, incidentally, but that's by the by. The Spitfires went a lot faster, climbed a lot quicker, and they were to shoot down the fighter cover. The Hurricanes, which weren't so good, but were a good gun platform, were there to shoot down the Heinkels and the bombers, all right? They both had a different role in the Battle of Britain, and they both had a very valuable role indeed. The Battle of Britain couldn't have been won without the Hurricane, although the Spitfire had the glamour. So that would be the analogy I used. Most of my portfolio are Hurricanes, but I do have some Spitfires on the runway as well. But we'll have to see.
Brilliant analogy.
Sadly, I'll be gone. I'll be gone by those days, but you won't be. And I hope you keep a clip of this and think, the silly old sod was right, or the silly old sod was a silly old sod.
Look, Godfrey, I think that's a really good analogy. And I fundamentally agree with you. I think one nuance I would just finally add there, because I'd love to wrap it up on that, because I think that's a beautiful note. But one small nuance is, I think when Bitcoin reaches its no, I don't want to use the word critical mass, but when it reaches, maturation, it will be much like what gold is today, is a wealth preservation tool. So today Bitcoin just happens to be climbing in relative purchasing power because it's emergent. So it's kind of compressing gold's 5,000-year history into a number of decades. So going from zero to maturation is going to come with a whole lot of volatility and a whole lot of increase in purchasing power. But I think what a lot of people forget about Bitcoin is they sort of look at it as an investment. But much like what you said about gold, is I actually view Bitcoin as the safest wealth preservation tool, because it is designed to be fixed in supply, immutable, uncensorable, etc. So long term, the Bitcoin's existence long term is about preserving purchasing power for holders and for savers, which is really what the function of money is supposed to be in the first place. And gold has represented that for many, many years. So I think today, whilst Bitcoin feels and smells and looks and tastes like an investment, I actually think it's just we're benefiting from being in early, because we're still waiting for the rest of the 90% of the world to catch up. And in doing so, we're actually going to disproportionately benefit by being in front of the race. It's kind of like finding gold on the side of the road while the rest of the world was still using seashells and salt. So you would have had a benefit because gold was mispriced. So I think Bitcoin is just fundamentally mispriced today, but it will do what gold has traditionally done. And that's where I think that probably, and like you said, depends on your time scale. If we're talking a short time scale, I think gold will maintain its monetary premium and act as this, storehold of wealth. But I actually think that monetary premium will begin to be eroded as Bitcoin matures and starts to adopt the mantle of the place you store your wealth safely, securely, that that what you can buy today is what you can buy in 10 years from now. So I think that's for anyone listening to this, I think, that's something maybe to go away and think about. And I'd love to, continue that conversation, either with yourself or anyone else in the future. But I think that's a very interesting thought experiment. But in the short term, like you said, we need hurricanes, we need Spitfires, because this battle is not going to be won by just one of us. It's going to require all of us to point all of our guns at these maniacs who are, like you said, a blend of fascist, socialist, mercantilist, cronyist, fantasist, and whatever the fuck else they are these days. Apologies for my swearing, but it's we have to hit them where it hurts. And if we're going to throw gold bricks at them, or if we're going to throw Bitcoin at them, I don't care what it is. We just need to do this. Otherwise, the future of the world is not very pretty at all. So, Godfrey, I don't know if you've got any closing comments. I'd love to hear if you've got some final comments.
We are in complete agreement, and I hope you're right. I mean, I hope you're right. I think one of the best monetary concepts ever is the concept of real cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. And it's great, which is why I'm a supporter, which is why I'm adding to my portfolio. and that's great. And as you say, we're all on the same side. We're all on the same side. If you want out of fiat currency, out of political currencies, we're on the same side. Doesn't really matter in the short term which route you go, but yeah, you're right. I think you're probably right in the long term, but long term's a long term, isn't it?
Indeed. All right, my friend Godfrey, where can people find you if you want to give a quick spiel so that way they can follow your work?
My website, which is quite constructive in many ways because it has a big health page on independent information on coronavirus, which has been quite carefully put together. Just website, where you can get onto independent information outside the government sphere. That's quite useful. A lot of essays and a lot of podcasts, a lot of not podcasts, a lot of videos, 5-6 minutes. Rants which seem quite popular because it's generally speaking they all say the same thing. Why don't we hang the bastards?
Yep. And I will put the link in the show notes, but if you can tell everyone what the website is it
The
just
link is just Godfrey Bloom, small case, .uk. Godfrey Bloom,
perfect.
small case, .uk.
Is there a .co in there, or is it just the straight .uk?
Just a straight .uk.
Perfect. All right. So, and then on Twitter, it's just Godfrey Bloom, right?
Godders. I don't know. It's all on the website. I've got a man who deals with that. I'm not tech savvy. That's all I can remember. GodfreyBloom.uk.
Perfect. Not a problem. I'll whack everything in the show notes. Godfrey, thank you so much. I really, really, really actually genuinely enjoyed this conversation. I think a lot of people are going to get some value from this. And I thank you sincerely for taking some time out to come on this.
It's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure. It's been fun, this Bitcoin adventure for me. I'm enjoying every moment of it. I've made some money too.
Thanks. I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you,
Toodaloo.
Godfrey.
Bye-bye. Bye.